Hey everyone, and welcome. We're going to do something a little different today, and I hope you guys like this. What we did was fully recorded the webinar ahead of time, so it's going to be one 30-minute piece that you guys can watch in its entirety. And this is a fun subject. I've got my 758 here, I've got my color checker, and we're going to do some great landscape shots. So let's take a look. Hey everyone, I'm Joe Brady. I'm here to talk about getting great color and exposure in landscape photography, and we're going to do it with two tools, the Sekonic 758 light meter and the ColorChecker Passport. Now you might think, why do I need these tools? My camera does everything. And they should make every shot perfect, shouldn't they? Well, cameras don't know a lot of things. They don't know what's important in the image. They don't know what to do when surrounding color of objects influences the scene. They have no idea what it is you're taking a picture of. When you take control of the exposure for a particular scene and provide yourself with a color reference, you get perfect exposure and the most accurate color in every image. You, of course, are going to want to make adjustments in software and enhance your landscape images. But when you take control of these two critical elements, exposure and color, then your edits are going to begin with the best possible digital file. Now, why should you care about this? Well, without having these two elements in place, you're going to probably spend a lot more time in front of the computer. That means less time for your family, less time to relax, and less time for shooting. I've been teaching Photoshop for over 20 years, and I've been teaching Lightroom since it came out. I love working in these programs, but I prefer to use them to enhance my images, not to try to correct bad files. When you do these corrections, the more editing you do, the more damage you're going to cause to that digital file. And the end result is when you go out to print, you're going to end up with banding in your skies and those nice blue gradations, and you're going to end up with noise in your shadows. We don't want to do that. We want to have a pristine file as our starting point. So today we're going to explore how these two tools will allow much less editing software, more accurate color, and no missed shots. The payoff is making your landscape photography better. So we're going to start with the ColorChecker Passport. We'll do this because it comes into play right at capture and then again when we process our images. The ColorChecker Passport is a simple yet powerful tool that every photographer should have. It provides not only neutral references for accurate white balancing, but it also provides a set of standard colors that help you achieve an accurate color response in every scene with any camera that can capture a raw file. Now you might think that having a correct white balance is enough, and you'd be mistaken. Why is this? Well, every camera manufacturer has an idea about how color should be rendered. There's no standard for red, green, and blue. This not only changes between manufacturers, but even between different models from the same manufacturer. You can shoot the exact same scene using the exact same settings and the same white balance and get a very different color response from two different cameras. This isn't very helpful. What the ColorChecker Passport does is it provides a standard set of color references that software can use to snap those colors around whatever your chosen white balance is. This set of color corrections is called a custom camera profile. We're going to create one in software, and you'll see how easy it is to do, and then we'll see the benefits of this a little later on. Now initially all you need to do is to take a couple of shots with the ColorChecker Passport in the frame in the same lighting conditions as the scene that you want to capture. So what exactly does this mean? How many shots do you need to take? Now for my landscape photography, I like to have two primary custom camera profiles. One for full sun, one for full shade. Because what this is going to do is correct for differences in the spectrum of the color that's hitting the target. Now white balance may change through the course of the day. But sunlight is sunlight, so it really doesn't matter that you have a sunlight shot for everywhere you go. But Joe, what about clouds? What about sunrise and sunset? Well, these conditions may require an adjustment to the white balance, but not the camera profile. When you set a white balance, you're telling the camera what neutral is. The camera profile then distributes the colors around this neutral. And again, we'll see this in software a little bit later on. One other time I might create a custom camera profile is when my subject is surrounded by a lot of a particular color that's reflecting into the scene. Most commonly this happens when the scene is surrounded by trees with a lot of dense leaves, or in the desert when you've got a lot of sand reflecting up anywhere from beige to red. Having a custom profile will tone down this overabundance of that one particular color and keep it from influencing other elements in the scene. So we've got our ColorChecker Passport shots to ensure great color. Now let's put our meter to use. I'm using a Sekonic L-758DR for my landscape photography. This meter has a great advantage over most other meters. It has a built-in spot meter. There's actually two sensors in this, and for the spot meter I can actually look through this eyepiece here and see what's going on. This is a fantastic tool to have at your disposal when the scene you're photographing has bright clouds, snow, or flowing water that you need to have detail preserved in. Now, I can't emphasize this point enough. If you clip or blow out your highlights, the image file is pretty much worthless. Even though today's softwares can bring down pure white in an image, it's going to do it with no detail. You must protect those highlights. Now, another advantage that this meter shares with the Sekonic 478 is its ability to use the exposure profiles created by Sekonic's free DTS software. We'll direct you to videos that show how to do this step by step, but to sum up what this software does is the meter is then introduced to what your camera can do. The software finds your camera's tonal range and what the camera thinks that middle gray is. That information then gets loaded into the meter, so the meter measures the scene exactly how your camera sensor is going to see it. Now, if this meter is new to you, particularly if you've just taken it out of the box, I highly recommend you watch two short videos, one on setting custom functions specific for landscape photography, and another on using the Sekonic DTS software step by step. So what we're going to do is we're going to head out into the field. We're going to go over to a beautiful scene in upstate New York. It's called Stone Arch Bridge Park, and we're going to put these tools to work. So let's head out. So we're at Stone Arch Bridge Park. You can figure where the name comes from. This is in upstate New York. It's actually about 15 minutes west of a place called Bethel Woods that you may or may not know. Bethel Woods is where the Woodstock Music Festival actually took place. It didn't take place in Woodstock. So we've got our two tools out here. I've got my Sekonic 758 meter, and I've got my X-Rite /Sekonic ColorChecker Passport. And these two tools are going to allow me to capture this scene behind me perfectly. Now, this is a really tough set of conditions for a couple reasons. One, it's really contrasty back there. We've got quite a range from light to dark. So we need to get those bright highlights up as far to the right as possible without clipping them, so that we're not going to need multiple exposures for those shadows. The other thing is there's clouds moving in. It's supposed to be storms tomorrow, so the light is very variable. So I'm going to have to take a shot of my ColorChecker both under full sun and in the shadow of the clouds so that I have a custom profile for each. Now, metering this scene, again, can be a little bit tricky. First, look at the scene. What's the brightest thing in the scene? Well, I've got this flowing water in this small waterfall. It's looking like from this direction that's probably the brightest thing. So I want to push that to the right as far as possible without clipping it, and that's where the spot meter comes in. That's one of the greatest things about the 758, the fact that it has both a spot and an incident meter. Now we're going to use both today. To go to spot, I simply spin the eyepiece over to the right, and I'm going to point it at that bright highlight, and we actually just got covered with clouds. So I'm going to wait. I want to see the sun actually hitting that piece of waterfall, and I'm going to take my reading. Now, I've also programmed the ISO 2 button to be my filter compensation. I know on my camera, I'm shooting a Sony A7R, that I can open up 3 stops safely from that middle. So I'm going to take a reading off of that bright white as soon as it gets hit by sun, and I'm going to open up 3 stops for that. That's going to put that bright white far to the right without me being in danger of clipping it, and give me the best tonal range in a single shot. So the sun's almost clearing. I just got to wait another minute, so let's wait. Okay, we're starting to get some specular highlights on that waterfall, so let me go ahead and get my reading. I'm just going to hold in the button and scan around. find out the brightest number. And I'm getting 125th of a second at f13. Now remember, that would put that bright highlight dead center, make it a middle gray. I don't want a middle gray. I want to push it over to the right as far as possible. So I'm going to hit my ISO 2 button, and I've already got my meter set to 3 stops. So I can see it's 125 at 4.5. However, I want the shutter speed to change, not my aperture. I want to keep, f14 or f16 here. So I'm going to switch my meter to aperture priority. I'm going to go to f16, and it tells me at f16 my reading was 80th of a second. I hold an ISO 2, and 3 stops open from 80th of a second is 1/10 of a second. So that's going to be my perfect exposure for that scene to put those bright highlights off to the right. You can think of it this way too. 3 stops, 80 to 40 is 1, 40 to 20th of a second is 2, 20th of a second to 10th of a second is 3. There's your 3 stops. Sometimes it's not that easy to calculate. That's what's nice about having the meter. So 1/10 at 16. Let me go ahead and get that shot. Okay, so I got that. Whoa, as I fall over. Okay, so I got my shot. 1/10 at 16. I'm at 100 ISO. Now, according to my camera, that was a full stop overexposed. But I need to trust the meter. Why? Look at this scene. Remember, your camera is averaging the entire scene out to a middle gray. There's a lot of darkness in there. So if I open that up, it's going to make it look like it was overexposed. Even when I put my highlight warnings, I started getting the blinkies on the highlights. But if I took a close look at the histogram, particularly for each channel, I can see that none of them actually goes up against that right wall. That means it's safe. Remember, those blinkies turn on way before you actually clip. We've tested the camera. We created a profile using the DTS software for the meter. So this meter knows how that camera operates. It knows its tonal range. I know I can safely open up 3 stops, even though my blinkies are turning on and it says it's a stop overexposed. Trust the meter. That's going to give me the best digital capture possible. So now let's get involved with the ColorChecker Passport. Now, there's a couple of things that this can do. Well, first of all, what I want to do is I want to take a picture of the target in the light that's in the scene. Now, the scene is in shade, so I'm going to take one right here in full sun, so I have that, and I'll take one in the shade as well. That'll give me a custom profile. That will give me a target that I need to create that custom profile, and it also allows me to sample one of the neutral patches to get a white balance for that scene. So remember, once the sun is out, you only need one profile for that. What's going to change through the course of the day is your white balance. So we want to adjust the white balance, but one daylight sunlight profile is all we're going to need. Now, one other interesting thing about this target. This is the Sekonic version of the X-Rite ColorChecker Passport. And when you open up the back side, this is a white balance target. This is an 18% gray target. This has got an interesting use when you're using the 758 meter because it gives you an alternate way of getting your ambient exposure if you're measuring ambient light. So for example, if I want to measure the light right around me, I'll switch to ambient metering, and I need to make sure that that specular dot of the sun is not actually hitting the dome. Because if I take a reading out here, I get 250th of a second at f16. What I need to do is just get my finger in the way of that one little bright white dot that the sun is causing, take my reading, and I get 1/60th at 16. Now that's important because if I had let the sun hit it 2/50th at f16, what's happening? It's about 2/3 of a stop underexposed that would cause because that sunlight dot is skewing the reading and make it going darker. So you got to make sure that's covered. Now here's another option you can use. I've got the gray card, the 18% gray card in here. The other thing I can do is switch to spot metering, put the card in full sun, and take a spot meter reading off of the card. And strangely enough, I get the same reading that when I protected that dot. I'm getting 1/60th of a second, 1/160th of a second at f16. Now again, now the sun has completely cleared the clouds. Let's do the ambient thing one more time. So now I hold it out, and all right, I'm still at 250 at f16. Hold over, just get that dot covered, 160 at f16. Now I'll take my spot reading off of the gray card, 160 at f16. So they agree. So 1/160th of a second at f16, same reading, doing a spot meter reading off of the 18% gray card versus holding the meter out and just covering over that dot of the sun. Still want to have the rest of the dome hitting light, I just want to make sure that one little specular dot from the sun is being covered. That's easy as it is. So that'll give us a perfect exposure. So that's a great way to do it if you have an ambient scene and you don't have any really bright things that you need to maintain detail in. There are some clouds up here, so if I expand the scene, if I shoot some verticals and I get my clouds, I want to do the same thing I did for that water. I want to put the clouds 3 stops open from that. So let's go ahead and get a reading off the clouds. And again, I can just hold in the meter button till I get the biggest number, and I get 1/500th of a second at f/16. Hold in my ISO 2 button, and it tells me 60th of a second at f/16. We'll put those bright white clouds as far to the right as possible. If this was a well-lit ambient scene, like I say, if we were just taking a picture where I'm standing right here, the camera's meter is going to do a fine job. It's going to see everything and average it out. I'm wearing a dark shirt, light skin, light rocks behind me, not a problem. But when you have a high contrast scene like this is where your camera gets fooled, and this is where this comes in. Now the combination of this meter and this color checker is going to allow us to get the perfect exposure and then to have the perfect color in there. And again, the reason I want to get a custom profile right here as well as in there is these leafy trees over here are causing a lot of green reflections. I may not want to maintain all of that. So if I go in there and take a shot of the color checker as well, it's going to end up bringing down that green to a more normal level. It's a subjective thing, but at least give us a perfect starting point. So let's go ahead and do that. Lovely, so there's my shot for full sun. Now I'm going to walk over into the shade and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll take a meter reading under the shade. Won't need to cover the dome that point because there's not going to be any sun hitting it. And I'll take another shot there. That'll give me a color checker reference so that I can adjust the color for anything out in the sun or under that shade. So let me go ahead and do that. One other tool I brought with me today is called a neutral density filter. In fact, this is a really dense one. It's called a 10-stop neutral density filter. The reason I brought this is because I knew that this was going to have flowing water, a little waterfall here. And I love the look of water as it's captured over time and flowing. In addition, the water that's underneath the bridge will become silky smooth and almost like a mirror. So a neutral density filter, in fact, you can't even see through this one practically, it's so dark. It's kind of like just thinking of as dark sunglasses for your camera. What it does is cuts down the amount of light, and it does it equally so that I can really slow my shutter speed down and I can get, probably a 10 or 20 second exposure of this water. And what it's going to do is give us that silky smooth look. How do you figure out exposure when you've got a 10-stop neutral density filter? That means I have to open up 10 stops from whatever my reading is. So let's one more time go through the reading and I'll show you a little bit of simple math. It helps if you have a little calculator on your phone, but let's do some simple math to figure that out. So I've got the sun hitting that water. So let's go ahead and get our reading. Okay, I'm getting 1/400th of a second at f/18. But remember, we need to open up 3 stops from that to put that bright on the right. So I hold in my ISO 2 button and it gives me 1/50th of a second at f/18. Now that would be a perfect exposure without using the filter. However, if we're going to put our 10-stop ND filter on, we need to figure out what 10 stops open from 1/50th of a second at f/18 is. Here's how you do it. It's a pretty simple calculation, but it helps to have your phone with you or something that's got a calculator in it. So you need to find out the fraction of what 1/50th of a second is. So first I just divide 1 by 50 and I get 0.02. Then you multiply that by 1024. Where does that come? That's actually 2 to the 10th power. That's our 10 stops. So multiply that by 1024 and I get 20.5, 20.48. That means my perfect exposure for a 10-stop ND filter is going to be just a smidge over 20 seconds. That's all there is to it. So we'll see how that looks. Obviously, when you do this kind of stuff, you got to have a tripod. It's really important. A nice steady tripod. A lightweight one is nice when you're doing a lot of traveling, and that's what I'm using. So there's our tools. Our light meter, our ColorChecker Passport, tripod, neutral density filter. Great shots. That's all it is. That's all it takes. It's a lot of fun, beautiful scene. I'm going to walk around and explore and see what else we can get. We'll head back to the studio and take a look. So we went out on location, we got some great photographs, we've got our shots of the ColorChecker Passport. Now it's time to put it all to work. We're going to go into software. Now I'm going to use Adobe Lightroom today, but the editing process is exactly the same if you're using Adobe Camera Raw for either Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. First thing we're going to do is create our custom profile, and then we're going to apply it to our images. Let's take a look. I'm going to jump into Lightroom. So here we are in Lightroom, and the first thing we need to do is to create that custom camera profile. Now you can probably notice from this screen that the white balance is off on here. It's not actually something you need to change before you create the profile. Remember, the software is going to look at the raw data, and it knows from all these neutral patches what neutral should be. So watch the process. It's really simple. Once you've installed the software that comes with the ColorChecker Passport, in Lightroom, just go to File, Export with Preset, and you'll see ColorChecker Passport listed there. Give it a name. I'll call it Stone Bridge. And click on Save. That's how complicated it is. That's all you need to do. Now, when Lightroom is done creating the profile, it'll come up and say the profile's been created and you need to restart Lightroom for it to be activated. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you create a profile here in Lightroom, Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw will see it as well. While the image is processing, let's just take a quick look at the histogram up here, and you can see that the exposure is completely filling the histogram here. We're getting close to pure white, but not quite, close to pure black and not quite. This image was taken, and the first thing that was done was an ambient reading was taken with the Sekonic 758 meter to ensure that there's no clipping going on in the target, because if you do clip the target, then the file will be unusable and you're going to have to shoot another one. Okay, we get the message in Lightroom that the profile has been generated and Lightroom has to be restarted so that it can see the profile. So we'll hit OK. We'll quit Lightroom and restart it. All right, so here we are back with our file. Now, let's do two things. First, we're going to do is white balance this. So I'm just going to tap the W key, brings up my picker. Now, technically, all of these should be neutral, but the lightest one has the most data. So if you haven't clipped anything in your white patch, this is a good one to use. If you want to play it safe, you can use the second one over. But you can notice in the bottom, you see those three numbers for red, green, and blue. If this was neutral, they would be even. Obviously, they're not. So let's click on here. And now we have a better white balance. Now take a look at this target. As we go down to camera calibration, the Adobe standard is the standard profile. But what I want you to do is take a look closely at these two blues, the orange, this green and lavender, and then this orangey color here. Watch what happens to those colors when we apply our Stone Bridge profile, which is here under camera calibration. Just see those colors jump, and you can really see particularly this blue, this kind of eggplant color, and this deep yellow orange. Let's go back one more time to the Adobe Standard, and you can see we're losing some saturation in colors using the Adobe Standard profile. By having a custom profile, all the colors snap in place. So now we know we have a perfect white balance and a perfect color calibration. And what we can do is apply that to other images. Now, I mentioned sometimes that an image isn't going to look necessarily great on the back of your camera, even though it's the best digital capture possible. Here's an example. So we can see it does look kind of dull and lifeless, but we needed to protect the highlights because there are some clouds in here that, because of the camera's standard contrast curve that's built into it, we've lost detail. However, when we look up at the histogram here, we can see we're very close to the edge, and that's what we used the meter for. We spot metered off of this cloudscape here, or this almost pure white clouds, and we can see we're almost down to pure black. So we need to adjust this image. But first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go back to our target shot, and I'm going to hold down Shift and click on that X image. Then I'm going to come over here and click on Sync. And what I want to do is synchronize the white balance and the calibration in the process. So when I do that, then come over to this image, I've got a very different color response, although it is still looking dull. So here's a quick process when you have a very high contrast scene, what you can do to make it look a lot better. So what are the problems? Well, we've got these highlights, but we don't really have any detail in them, even though they're not blown out. So the first thing I'll do is bring the highlights way down. Forget the rest of the image. Notice now we've got the clouds showing up a lot better. Let's zoom in here. Maybe not quite that much. We'll back off a little. There you go. And you can see the difference now from here to here. We've got our detail back. However, it did make the rest of the image dark. So let's bring up the shadows, and we'll open those up a lot. Now, when you do this, sometimes you might want to bring up the exposure as well. So let's go ahead and bring the exposure up just a little bit, just that much, because now we're going to go down to presence. We're going to increase the clarity, Oh, looking better already. Vibrance, which will increase the saturation in cooler and less saturated colors. And then overall saturation. And wow, that's looking a lot better also, isn't it? I'm going to also add a little contrast. I find most images need a little contrast pop to really make them look good. And look how quickly we've gotten there. I'm going to hit the Y key, which will show us a before and after. And that quickly we've gone from this image on the left to the image on the right. It's got the camera profile applied. It's got beautiful color. We've got our cloud details back by bringing down those highlights just that quickly. And that's the benefit of having the meter and the profile and the custom profile with the color checker. The meter allowed us to get the detail back in our clouds over here. The profile allowed all the colors to snap back into place. Now, while we're here, I'll show you one other trick I like to show. This is a scene that has two different color balances in it. We've got full shade here, and then we've got the bridge over here in sun. Now, that profile was actually created with me holding the target just out of the shade, so it's for the sun. And that had a tendency to make the shadow area go a little bit too yellow. So here's what I like to do when that happens. This is the graduated tool, the graduated mask tool. I'll put a graduated mask from the bottom to top there. And I'm going to change the color temperature a little bluer to make it look a little more natural like shade. Just that quickly, and looks a lot better. So let's hit that Y key again. I'll hide the other menus so we get some more real estate. And you can see left to right, that's the same exact file with just that quick set of changes. And that's the beauty of having the meter and the ColorChecker Passport for that custom profile. You end up with a beautiful image. So wow, we got some great results. I did my edits in Lightroom. For a couple of the images, I even added a little extra pop using some plugins. I used NYX Viveza and I used Mac Fun's Intensify Pro. So what have we seen today? I hope you see that these two tools will greatly add to the quality of your landscape photography experience. Having the best exposure possible under any lighting conditions and the best starting point for color means that you can concentrate on your images. You're not going to miss shots, you're not going to miss opportunities. A landscape photography may seem like a leisurely activity, but really changing light, cloud movements, flowing water, rising and setting sun, that all makes for very fast moving changes that can cause the difference between an okay or a good photograph to a great one. Add a Sekonic L-758DR meter and a ColorChecker Passport to your camera bag and you can take control of light and color. That allows you to concentrate on that scene in front of you and capture that next great image. So that's it for today. Hope you've learned something, hope you had some fun. I know I did going out to this place, and I put these tools to use, and it means I can shoot less, but shoot better. I get to concentrate on what I'm doing. So until next time, get out there and keep shooting. Hope you learned something, and hope to see you again. Bye-bye. All right, and we're back. Let's see, the first thing, somebody mentioned that when they're in the DTS software, that they're only seeing the numbers for the ambient mode, and the spot mode seems to show the default settings. When you go, and we have another program on the DTS software in detail, we can send you a link to that, but when you're taking your readings off the target for the DTS software, if you have a 758, yes, you've got your integrated spot meter, and you have two choices. If you have the Sekonic version of the ColorChecker target, you've got this gray card here. If you don't, if you have a standard X-Rite ColorChecker, that's okay too. You can use the spot meter in the 758 and read off the fourth patch. The fourth patch right here is the same exact target. Now, if you're using another meter like a 478, it's kind of hard to get a reading here using that 5-degree spot meter. You can do it, it's a little trickier. If you have a separate X-Rite 18% gray card, you can use that as well. Now, if you have a 478 and you don't have a spot meter, What your option is, you can just ignore that part. Just don't take the spot meter reading. So take your ambient reading, and when you go into the software and it asks you what were your values for the spot reading or for the incident reading and the spot reading, just use this in the spot meter readings, use the same value used for the incident reading because you're not going to be calibrating a spot meter in the 478 since it only has the one sensor. The big reason for doing that in a 478 is that the incident reading and the spot reading actually use two different sensors. That's why you might have a variation on that. If you're using a 478, the attachment is just still using the same sensor that the incident reading uses, so you're not going to really get a different number there. Here's a really good question about the color checker. So if we use a Passport and green grass or blue sky are reflected into it, wouldn't we be reducing these colors in the profiling process? Or maybe we reduce them in the balancing phase, the white balancing phase, but the profile would add it back in. Where you run into a trouble with less with a blue sky, more with green reflections, is not that it's going to affect the green, but that it's going to affect other colors. So if you have green shining onto green, there's not going to be a big color shift. However, if you've got trees around or dirt or clothing color, then that's going to be influenced by the green. And that's what the ColorChecker Passport will fix for. So if you've got this in the scene, and let's say a lot of green is shining onto a red, for example, that's going to influence how this red reflects back into the camera. The profiling process will remove that green component from the red, and it will pretty much leave the green and blue alone. So what the Passport does is it affects how a color like that affects other colors, and it's not going to affect that primary color as much. Good question. Let's see. Oh, here's another one. Somebody says, if the Passport does not have a lot of daylight exposure, meaning it hasn't been sitting out in the dashboard of your car all August, will the colors remain intact, or is it a time issue for replacement? Really, that's a long way of saying how often should you replace these. Well, the Passport, if you keep it closed, is pretty light tight. That's what's nice about this case. It's light tight, it's pretty well protected in here. If it's getting a lot of sun, any color is going to reduce in intensity over time. So what is a good time frame? Well, this Passport's relatively new, it's the Sekonic version. I've got some ColorChecker Passports that are a couple years old and they're performing fine. You will see a degradation of color when it gets to that point where it's time to replace. Yes, they'd like you to replace it. Oh, you should buy one every week. That's what they'd like you to do. But really, if you take care of it, it should be good for a couple of years. So if somebody asks, the ColorChecker Passport is good for camera profiles. Do you really need a spot meter? All right. Do you need any of this stuff? Do you have to absolutely have it? Well, no, you can just go about doing things the way that you've been doing it. What these two tools do is give you the information you need for perfect exposure and perfect color. You don't have to have it. You can just spend all your time in front of the computer and try to get what you're after. Think of it this way. You might be an expert baker, and you can just visualize what a perfect cup of flour is going to be. But for those that are less experienced, well, that's what you have a measuring cup for. This is your measuring cup. Or if you're into building, it's your tape measure. This gives you the exact number. You don't have to eyeball it. And having that perfect starting point gives you the best results and gets the most out of your camera. The whole thing about the spot meter for me, if you're photographing a scene with a big cloudscape or you've got flowing water with bright highlights that you need to maintain, what the spot meter does is it gives you that exact number, so that you know what is the farthest end of my exposure I can go without clipping those. Because if you clip highlights that you need to keep, the file is done. You can't use it. So this is going to give you the most out of your camera. Do you have to have it? No, you can kind of guess. You can look at your histogram and make sure it's not up against the right wall. If you do that, there's a couple of things you're doing. You're sacrificing tonal range. Because remember, the histogram on your camera is of a processed JPEG from that file. It's not showing you the raw data. Same thing with your clipping points. If you have your little blinkies set on your camera, they're going to come on way too soon. They come on way before you actually clip. What this allows you to do is learn exactly how far your camera can go out before you clip and allow you to place those whites right at the edge. And what that means is you're going to get better shadow details because you're getting the most tonal range out of that capture. That's what these tools do. So can you operate without any of these tools? Of course you can, and many of you have, and many of us have for years. What these two tools do is give you the information for you to make better decisions and get the best file possible in a single shot. Let's see, someone asked, oh, here's a good one. Will 100 ISO versus 800 ISO change white balance and my saved profile? It should not change white balance, but it may change a profile because your camera sensor has different capabilities as the ISO goes up. I'm not sure how much of a difference you're going to see between 100 and 800 ISO. It's going to depend on the level of the camera. But I do have profiles from my camera at 100 ISO and 2500 ISO because at that point you're going to start to lose some tonal range from boosting the sensitivity of the sensor. So you might want to do that. I don't typically shoot that high ISO with the exception of maybe some night photography, but 100 to 800 or 100 to 400, I doubt you're going to see it. But it only takes a couple of minutes to create a profile. Take a look, try it, and you can take a look at the graph and you can see on your camera if there's that much of a difference. Let's see. Oh, here, someone asked, do you use the black and white patches on the color checker to set black, say, to 10 and white to 240 for a printing range in Photoshop? That is a way of working. There are some people who like to do that, set your black point, your white points using something like this. Actually, rather than using these patches down here, you should use these ones up top because this is more of a pure white and a pure black than on the bottom. So this color adjustment chart on the top of the ColorChecker Passport gives you a greater gray wedge. Is that really necessary for printing? Depends on your printer and it depends on knowing what your printer can do. I find 240 a little too conservative for printing. Most today's printers can go up to 250 and they will maintain that dot structure if you're using a good paper. So you can operate that way, but it's going to be very conservative. I don't think it's necessary. You can just use that's one place in Photoshop you can use your histogram for that. A couple of you asked about a dedicated night metering webinar. We're working on that. We're trying to get it on the schedule. Hasn't been scheduled yet, but we have some great assets. We've got some great people that are really skilled in that. And what we'll do is we'll do a webinar with them, and I will learn a lot more about photographing the night sky with these guys. Somebody asked tell us about ISO 2. Well, that's a pretty broad question, but let's just talk about it real quick. Now, there is a little target that you got with your 758. Do you have this target? A lot of people lost it. They didn't even realize it was in the box, and it went away. So actually, I have to put my glasses on. Let me just read this, because I can never remember what all the custom settings are. Okay, so the first one, custom setting 1, is what do you want the ISO 2 button to do? Out of the box, the ISO 2 button is simply another ISO, if you wanted to see what your exposure would be. So if I hold an ISO 2, then that's what that becomes. That's actually a holdover from the days when photographers were shooting film and they were also shooting Polaroids because they didn't have that digital preview. Typically, Polaroid film was not 100 ISO or 60 ISO that you were shooting your film at. It was 800 or 1600 or something else. So the ISO 2 button would be for that Polaroid shot. Nowadays, I find it much more useful for using it for that exposure compensation. And that involves going in and changing the custom settings. Again, there's a video for this, which we will direct you to as soon as it is up. But the way to access it, just real quick, is when you turn the meter off, and before you hit the power button, hold in the mode button. When you do that, you'll come up and it'll say CS in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And the first one is 010 is custom setting 1. You want custom setting 1 to be 1. So what you do is you just rotate, you don't rotate the jog wheel, you hit the mode button, and it will cycle through the choices. In this case, there's 2 choices, 0 or 1. 0 leaves the ISO 2 button as ISO 2. Changing it to 1 changes it to a filter compensation. So when you do that, turn off the meter, power it back on, and now when you hold in ISO 2, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 2 numbers, which is really, it's a decimal point, and then you can rotate up and down. So I have mine set for 3 stops. It just says 3.0. And that will immediately give me the answer as to how do I open up 3 stops from there. Someone asked, what do you do when you have a filter on? They use a polarizer. A circular polarizer, it's easy for me to say, when it's on full power, when you've got it turned around to its darkest setting, in general, is going to subtract 2 stops of light. It's a good safety number to use. 2 stops is going to be the maximum. So if you want to compensate 3 stops for those clouds, you want to push your clouds to the right, then you need to compensate for your polarizer. That's going to be another 2 stops. They just add together. So what you would do is you would set your exposure compensation to 5 stops instead of 3. And that'll take in account putting that white to the right and also open up 2 stops for that circular polarizer. Let's see. Excuse me. Someone said that I had done dual luminant profiles in the past. Would this be sufficient for my stone bridge scene? I didn't go into dual luminant profiles today. In short, what they are is the software for the color checker allows you to create a profile where you'll photograph the color checker under 2 different light sources. So say, for example, you'd shoot it under tungsten light and daylight. You then create a master profile that takes into account those 2 illuminants, those 2 different types of light sources. It is better than having a single illuminant profile, but it's not as accurate as a specific profile for a specific light source. So if you want to work that way, that's an option. Me personally, it takes 30 seconds to create a custom color profile. I like to have those with my camera settings, and I like to have it in my software when I see it. I name it accordingly, and I probably have 6 or 8 profiles for each of my cameras. So it's up to you. Custom profile for that scene is always going to be the best. Dual luminant profile would be the next most accurate. Let's see, anything else? I think I've got pretty much all the questions here. Is that it? Let's see. I think that is it. Thank you so much for the questions. Thanks for joining us today, and hope to see you again soon. Until then, be well. Bye-bye.